Sarah Chen had learned to ignore the whispers long before she ever set foot on Kepler Station. At 22, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with delicate features that made her look more like a college student than someone who had just completed the most brutal military training program in human space. But the whispers followed her anyway. "She doesn't look like much," came the first comment as she stepped off the transport shuttle onto the gleaming metal deck of humanity's most advanced military training facility. The station hung in the shadow of Kepler 442b, a massive gas giant whose swirling storms provided a dramatic backdrop for what would become the most important 3 months of Sarah's life. "I heard they're lowering standards again," another voice muttered from somewhere behind her. "First they let anyone sign up, now they're sending kids." Sarah kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral. She had heard it all before during her time at the academy on Mars. The doubt, the assumptions, the casual dismissal of her capabilities based on her appearance. She had learned that responding only made things worse. Better to let her actions speak for themselves. The orientation hall buzzed with nervous energy as 200 of the galaxy's finest military candidates gathered for the most elite training program in human space. The Titan program was legendary. Only 50 candidates would graduate, and those who did would become humanity's elite special forces, the first line of defense against the growing alien threats on the rim worlds. Commander Marcus Webb stood at the front of the hall, his scarred face and cybernetic left arm telling the story of decades of combat experience. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority when he spoke. "Welcome to hell," he began, his words cutting through the chatter like a plasma blade. "For the next 3 months, you will be pushed beyond your limits. You will discover weaknesses you didn't know you had, and you will either overcome them or wash out. Of the 200 people in this room, only 50 will graduate. The rest will return to regular military service with the knowledge that they weren't good enough when it mattered most." Sarah felt the familiar flutter of nerves in her stomach, but she pushed it down. She had made it this far through pure determination and an almost supernatural ability to outthink her opponents. Physical strength wasn't everything, though try telling that to the mountain of muscle standing next to her. Gunnery Sergeant Mike Torres looked like he had been carved from granite. At 6 feet 6 inches and nearly 300 pounds of solid muscle, he had already established himself as the unofficial leader of the Marine contingent. His reputation preceded him. 3 tours on the rim worlds, 2 Purple Hearts, and a confirmed kill count that was classified but rumored to be in the triple digits. "Check out the tiny one," Torres whispered to his buddies, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Wonder if they make body armor in her size." The group of Marines around him chuckled, and Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She had dealt with this kind of treatment before, but it never got easier. The worst part was that part of her wondered if they were right. What was she doing here among these giants? "Something funny, Sergeant Torres?" Commander Webb's voice cut across the hall like a whip. "No, sir," Torres replied, snapping to attention. "Just welcoming the new recruits, sir." Webb's eyes swept across the group, lingering for a moment on Sarah before moving on. "Good, because you're going to need all the friends you can get. This program has a 90% failure rate for Marines, and that's with people who come in thinking they're already the toughest thing in the galaxy." The first week was a blur of physical assessments, psychological evaluations, and theoretical exams. Sarah surprised herself by performing well in the physical tests, though she was nowhere near the top. Years of martial arts training and rock climbing had given her a wiry strength that served her well in the endurance challenges, even if she couldn't match the raw power of the bigger candidates. But it was in the theoretical portions where she truly excelled. Military history, xenobiology, tactical analysis, weapons systems. She absorbed it all like a sponge. While other candidates struggled with the complex strategic simulations, Sarah found herself thinking 3 moves ahead, seeing patterns and possibilities that others missed. "Not bad for a kindergartner," Torres commented after Sarah finished first in a particularly difficult tactical exam. "Too bad war isn't fought on paper." His comment drew laughs from his circle of Marine friends, and Sarah felt the familiar sting of dismissal. But this time, something was different. This time, she felt a spark of anger kindle in her chest, not the helpless frustration she had felt before, but something sharper and more focused. The second week brought combat simulations, and this was where the Marines expected to shine. The scenarios were run in full immersion VR pods that made everything feel completely real. Pain, exhaustion, even the smell of smoke and cordite. It was all there. The first scenario was a simple patrol mission gone wrong. 5-person teams had to extract a downed pilot from hostile territory while dealing with enemy contact. Sarah found herself assigned to a team with 4 Marines, including Torres. "Stay behind me, little sister," Torres said as they prepared to enter the simulation. "This is about to get real, and I don't want to have to explain to your parents why you didn't make it home." The simulation dropped them into a rocky canyon on an alien world. Twin suns blazed overhead, and the air shimmered with heat. In the distance, they could see the smoke from the downed aircraft, but between them and their objective lay 3 miles of hostile terrain, crawling with enemy forces. Torres immediately took point, with his 3 Marine buddies falling into formation behind him. Sarah brought up the rear, her smaller frame easily keeping pace despite the challenging terrain. For the first hour, everything went according to plan. They moved carefully from cover to cover, avoiding enemy patrols and making steady progress toward their objective. Then everything went wrong at once. An enemy sniper opened fire from a concealed position on the ridge above them. Torres dove for cover, shouting orders, but the simulation's enemy AI had planned for this. While the team was pinned down by sniper fire, enemy infantry began flanking them from both sides. "We need to move!" Torres yelled over the sound of incoming fire. "Johnson, lay down suppressing fire! Rodriguez, smoke grenades! We're falling back to the secondary position!" But Sarah was no longer listening to Torres. She was studying the battlefield with the cold calculation that had made her the top theoretical student in the program. The enemy positions, the terrain features, the likely escape routes, it all formed a 3-dimensional puzzle in her mind, and she could see exactly how the pieces fit together. "Negative," she said quietly. Torres turned to stare at her in disbelief. "What did you say?" "I said negative, Sergeant. Falling back is exactly what they want us to do. Look at the terrain." Sarah's voice was calm and professional despite the chaos around them. "They've got the high ground on 3 sides, but there's a blind spot in their coverage at 2 o'clock. If we go that way, we can flank the sniper position and take out their overwatch." "Are you insane?" Torres shot back. "That's a sheer cliff face. There's no way up there." "There's a maintenance access tunnel about 200 meters that way," Sarah replied, pointing to a barely visible opening in the rock face. "It's in the mission briefing data, page 47. The facility was built into the cliff to hide it from orbital bombardment." Torres stared at her for a moment, then shook his head. "Too risky. We stick to the plan." But as they began their fighting withdrawal, everything unfolded exactly as Sarah had predicted. The enemy had anticipated their retreat route and had positioned forces to cut them off. Within minutes, the entire team was trapped in a killing field with no escape route. The simulation ended with all 5 team members dead, including the pilot they had been sent to rescue. During the after-action review, Instructor Captain Lisa Park pulled up a holographic display of the battlefield. "This scenario has a 30% success rate," she explained to the assembled candidates. "The key is recognizing that the obvious tactical solution is actually a trap. Candidate Chen, would you care to explain your alternative proposal?" Sarah stood up, feeling the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on her. In a clear, confident voice, she laid out her plan. She explained how the maintenance tunnel would have provided access to the sniper's position, how eliminating the overwatch would have collapsed the enemy's tactical advantage, and how the team could have then proceeded to the objective with minimal further resistance. When she finished, the hall was silent. Several of the instructors were nodding thoughtfully, and even some of the other candidates looked impressed. But when Sarah looked toward Torres and his group, she saw only skepticism and barely concealed irritation. "Sounds good in theory," Torres said when Captain Park asked for comments. "But theory isn't reality. In a real firefight, you don't have time to flip through the mission briefing looking for maintenance tunnels. You need to react based on training and experience, not some academic exercise." Several other Marines nodded in agreement, and Sarah felt the familiar isolation settle around her like a cold fog. No matter what she did, no matter how well she performed, they would always see her as an outsider, a theorist playing at being a soldier. But Captain Park wasn't finished. "Interesting point, Sergeant Torres. Since you feel so strongly about the value of experience over analysis, how about we test that theory? Tomorrow's exercise will be a modified version of the same scenario. Candidate Chen will lead one team and you'll lead another. We'll see which approach is more effective." Torres grinned with predatory satisfaction. "Looking forward to it, ma'am. Should be educational." That night, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk staring at the ceiling of the dormitory. Around her, she could hear the quiet conversations of the other candidates, the whispered strategies and nervous jokes that helped them cope with the pressure. But nobody was talking to her. She thought about her brother David, who had died 3 years earlier during the Battle of Proxima Station. He had been everything she wasn't: tall, strong, naturally charismatic. The kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately command respect. He had believed in her when nobody else did, had encouraged her to pursue military service even when their parents thought she was crazy. "You've got something special, Sarah," he had told her during their last conversation. "You see things differently than other people. That's not a weakness. It's your greatest strength. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." David would have known what to say to Torres and his friends. He would have found a way to win them over, to make them see past her size and appearance to the capable soldier underneath. But David was gone, and Sarah was on her own. She closed her eyes and began to plan. Tomorrow, she would have her chance to prove herself. She wouldn't waste it. The next morning dawned bright and clear aboard Kepler Station. The artificial gravity and atmospheric systems created the illusion of being planet-side, complete with a simulated sunrise that painted the observation decks in shades of gold and orange. But there was nothing peaceful about the energy crackling through the training facility. Word had spread about the upcoming competition between Sarah and Torres. It wasn't often that instructors pitted candidates against each other so directly, and everyone wanted to see how it would play out. The smart money was on Torres. He had size, experience, and a team of hand-picked Marines who had trained together for years. Sarah found herself assigned a team of misfits and underdogs. There was Yuki Tanaka, a brilliant engineer from the Jupiter colonies, who was physically unimpressive but had an almost mystical understanding of technology. Marcus O'Brien was a former police detective from Earth who approached every problem like a criminal investigation. Elena Vasquez was a pilot whose small size had kept her out of fighter cockpits, but whose spatial awareness was legendary. Finally, there was Ahmed Hassan, a quiet communications specialist who spoke 7 languages and could hack into enemy systems with nothing but a standard field radio. "Not exactly the A-team," O'Brien observed dryly as they gathered for their mission briefing. "They're better than you think," Sarah replied, studying each of her teammates carefully. "We just need to play to our strengths instead of trying to out-marine the Marines." The scenario was indeed a modified version of the previous day's disaster. Same crashed pilot, same hostile territory, same enemy positions. But this time, Sarah's team would be approaching from the north, while Torres's Marines came in from the south. Whichever team reached the pilot first and successfully extracted him would win. Torres caught Sarah's eye as they prepared to enter their respective simulation pods. "Hope you've been studying your mission briefings, Chen," he said with a mocking smile. "Wouldn't want you to miss any important details." "Good luck, Sergeant," Sarah replied evenly. "May the best team win." As the simulation initialized, Sarah felt the familiar tingle of neural interface activation. The sterile training facility faded away, replaced by the harsh landscape of an alien world. Red sand stretched to the horizon, broken by jagged rock formations that offered both cover and danger. The air was thin and hot, with a metallic taste that suggested a high iron content in the atmosphere. "Okay, people," Sarah said quietly into her team communications. "Torres is going to try to brute force his way through the enemy positions. He's counting on superior firepower and aggressive tactics to overwhelm them before they can react. That means we need to be smarter, not stronger." She pulled up a three-dimensional map of the area on her heads-up display, highlighting key terrain features and known enemy positions. "Hassan, I need you to tap into the enemy communications network. I want to know where they are and what they're planning. Tanaka, start looking for alternative routes, maintenance tunnels, service corridors, anything that's not on the obvious approach paths." "What about weapons and equipment?" Vasquez asked. "Minimum necessary," Sarah replied. "We're going to move fast and light. The heavier Torres's team goes in, the more attention they'll draw. While they're keeping the enemy busy, we'll slip around behind them." For the next 30 minutes, Sarah's team moved like ghosts across the alien landscape. Hassan's electronic warfare skills kept them invisible to enemy sensors, while Tanaka guided them through a network of natural caves and ancient ruins that provided perfect concealment. O'Brien's investigative instincts helped them avoid the obvious trap points where enemy forces lay in wait. Meanwhile, the sounds of combat echoed across the canyon as Torres's team engaged the enemy head-on. Explosions lit up the horizon, and the radio chatter was filled with urgent tactical communications. It was exactly what Sarah had hoped for, a loud, obvious distraction that would draw every enemy unit away from the crash site. "Contact front!" Torres's voice crackled over the general communications channel. "Heavy resistance at grid reference 77 Alpha. Requesting immediate support." Sarah smiled grimly as she led her team through a narrow ravine that brought them within 100 meters of the downed aircraft. The pilot's emergency beacon was pulsing steadily on their displays, but there was no sign of enemy forces in the immediate area. "Too easy," O'Brien muttered as they approached the crash site. "Agreed," Sarah replied. "Vasquez, take us in low and fast. Tanaka, scan for booby traps or automated defenses. This has to be a trap." It was Hassan who spotted the danger first. "Commander, I'm detecting multiple heat signatures converging on our position. They're using the maintenance tunnels, the same ones we considered using yesterday." Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized what was happening. The enemy AI had adapted to her previous suggestion, turning her own tactical innovation against her. They were about to be caught in the same kind of trap that had destroyed Torres's team the day before. But this time, Sarah was ready. "Hassan, jam their communications. Tanaka, I need you to collapse the tunnel entrances. Can you do it?" "Give me 30 seconds, the engineer replied, her fingers flying over her portable engineering kit. "Vasquez, get to the pilot. O'Brien, watch our 6. This is about to get very messy." The next few minutes were chaos. Enemy forces poured out of hidden positions, filling the air with weapons fire. But Sarah's team was ready for them. Hassan's jamming had disrupted their coordination, while Tanaka's demolition work had sealed off their primary escape routes. Caught between the collapsed tunnels and Sarah's precisely positioned team, the enemy force found themselves in a classic hammer and anvil situation. It was over in less than 5 minutes. Sarah's team had not only rescued the pilot, but eliminated an entire enemy squad in the process. Meanwhile, Torres's Marines were still bogged down in a firefight 3 kilometers away, having fought their way through multiple defensive positions only to discover that the pilot was no longer at the original crash site. The simulation ended with Sarah's team successfully extracting the pilot to safety, while Torres's Marines were still trying to fight their way out of an increasingly desperate tactical situation. The silence in the after-action review room was deafening. Captain Park displayed the tactical summary on the main screen, showing the two teams' movements and the final casualty counts. Torres's Marines had suffered 60% casualties and failed to complete their primary objective. Sarah's team had 0 casualties and had accomplished not only the rescue, but a significant secondary objective as well. "Outstanding work, Candidate Chen," Captain Park said finally. "Textbook application of misdirection and tactical innovation. You turned the enemy's adaptation into a vulnerability and exploited it perfectly." Torres's face was stone as he stood to offer his analysis. "She got lucky," he said flatly. "In a real combat situation, there would have been backup forces, multiple contingency plans. The enemy AI is limited compared to actual hostile forces." "Perhaps," Captain Park replied. "But luck, as they say, tends to favor the prepared mind. Candidate Chen identified enemy patterns, anticipated their adaptation, and planned accordingly. That's not luck. That's superior tactical thinking." The room remained quiet as the implications sank in. For the first time since arriving at Kepler Station, Sarah had not just succeeded, she had dominated. And she had done it not through superior strength or firepower, but through the very qualities that Torres and his friends had dismissed as academic weakness. As the candidates filed out of the review room, Sarah found herself walking alone. But this time, the isolation felt different. Instead of the cold shoulder of dismissal, she sensed something else, a grudging awareness that perhaps the small woman from the academy might be more than she appeared. Behind her, she could hear Torres talking quietly to his friends, his voice tight with frustration and something that might have been the first stirring of respect. "Tomorrow's exercise is hand-to-hand combat assessment," one of them said. "Good," Torres replied. "Let's see how well her tactical theories work when she's facing a real opponent." Sarah smiled to herself as she headed back to her quarters. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove herself, and she was just getting started. The hand-to-hand combat training facility on Kepler Station was a masterpiece of engineering designed to test every aspect of physical confrontation. The main arena was a circular space 50 meters across, with adjustable gravity, variable terrain features, and holographic environmental controls that could simulate combat conditions on dozens of different worlds. Sarah stood at the edge of the arena, watching as the other candidates went through their matches. The format was simple: single elimination, 3-minute rounds, with points awarded for successful strikes, takedowns, and submission holds. Winners advanced, losers were eliminated, and the final rankings would count heavily toward overall program scores. She had spent the previous evening studying combat footage and reviewing tactical manuals, but she knew that all the theory in the world wouldn't help her against opponents who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. Her martial arts background would give her some advantage, but this wasn't a controlled dojo with rules designed for sport competition. This was military combat assessment, where the only rule was to win. "Nervous?" Yuki Tanaka appeared beside her, the engineer's usual quiet demeanor masking obvious anxiety about her own upcoming match. "Focused," Sarah replied, watching as Torres demolished another opponent with a combination of raw power and surprisingly sophisticated technique. The big Marine moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years turning violence into an art form. "He's been asking about your match schedule," Tanaka continued. "Word is he's planning something special for when you two face each other." Sarah nodded, having expected as much. Torres had been increasingly hostile since her tactical victory in the rescue simulation, his comments sharper and his glares more pointed. Part of her wondered if she should be concerned about facing someone with his obvious physical advantages and growing personal animosity. But a larger part of her was looking forward to it. "Chen, you're up!" The instructor's voice cut across the arena noise. Sarah's first opponent was Rodriguez, one of Torres's Marine friends. At nearly 6 feet tall and 220 pounds of muscle, he looked like he could break her in half without breathing hard. But as they faced each other in the center of the arena, Sarah found herself oddly calm. "Nothing personal," Rodriguez said quietly as they touched gloves. "Just want to make sure you know what you're getting into." "Likewise," Sarah replied. The match began with Rodriguez trying to use his size advantage, pressing forward aggressively and attempting to corner Sarah against the arena boundary. It was a sound strategy. Keep her from using her mobility, force her into a strength contest she couldn't win. But Sarah had no intention of fighting his fight. Instead of meeting his charge head-on, she moved laterally, using her smaller size to slip around his attacks while staying just out of range. For the first minute, she barely threw a strike, content to study his patterns and let him burn energy chasing her around the arena. "Stop running and fight!" someone yelled from the crowd of watching candidates. Sarah ignored the comment, focusing on the subtle tells that preceded Rodriguez's attacks. The slight shift in weight before a punch, the way his shoulders telegraphed kicks, the predictable combinations that revealed his training background. By the end of the first minute, she had mapped his entire fighting style. Then she went to work. Rodriguez threw a powerful right cross, the same attack he had used to finish his previous opponent. But instead of being there to receive it, Sarah had already moved, stepping inside his reach and driving her elbow into the nerve cluster just below his ribs. The strike was precise and devastating, causing his entire left side to go momentarily numb. Before he could recover, Sarah was behind him, her arm snaking around his throat in a perfect rear naked choke. Rodriguez was bigger and stronger, but size meant nothing when your blood supply was being cut off. He tapped out after 15 seconds. The arena fell silent. Then, slowly, a few people began to clap. Not the enthusiastic applause of celebration, but the grudging recognition of technical superiority. "Impressive," Captain Park commented during Sarah's post-match analysis. "You didn't try to match his strength. Instead, you used precision and timing to negate his advantages. That's exactly the kind of adaptive thinking we want to see." Sarah's second match was against O'Brien, her own teammate from the rescue simulation. The former detective was skilled and experienced, but he fought like a cop, defensive, methodical, looking for openings rather than creating them. Sarah respected his abilities, but knew she had the technical advantage. The match lasted 2 minutes and 47 seconds. O'Brien managed to land a few solid shots, but Sarah's speed and footwork kept her out of serious danger while she picked apart his defense. The finish came when she caught his leg during a kick attempt and swept his standing foot, sending him crashing to the ground where she secured an armbar for the submission. "Good match," O'Brien said as they walked off the arena floor together. "You've got skills I didn't expect." "Thanks," Sarah replied. "You're tougher than you look, too." Her third opponent was a Navy pilot named Jackson, who had washboard abs and the kind of confidence that came from years of successful missions. He was fast, technically sound, and had clearly studied her previous matches. But he made the same mistake everyone else had made. He assumed that her small size meant she couldn't hit hard enough to hurt him. Sarah's counterattack caught him completely off guard. When Jackson committed to a takedown attempt, leaving himself exposed for just a split second, Sarah's knee met his solar plexus with surgical precision. The impact folded him in half, and a follow-up elbow to the back of his neck sent him to the ground unconscious. The arena erupted in shocked conversation. Knocking out a trained pilot with 2 strikes was the kind of performance that demanded attention, and Sarah found herself the center of whispered speculation as she prepared for the semifinals. "She's got more power than anyone expected," she heard someone say. "Did you see that knee strike? Perfect technique." Maybe Torres was wrong about her, but Torres himself seemed unimpressed. When Sarah looked toward where he stood with his remaining friends, she saw only cold calculation in his eyes. He was studying her like a problem to be solved, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he was finding solutions. The semi-final match was against Elena Vasquez, her own teammate from the rescue mission. It was an awkward situation. They had worked well together and developed mutual respect. But only one of them could advance to the finals. "May the best woman win," Vasquez said with a rueful smile as they prepared to face each other. The match was the most technically demanding of Sarah's career. Vasquez was nearly her size, equally fast, and had clearly learned from watching Sarah's previous opponents. She didn't try to overpower Sarah or trap her in corners. Instead, she fought a patient, technical battle, matching Sarah technique for technique. For 2.5 minutes, they traded positions and near submissions in a chess match of human combat. The crowd watched in fascination as 2 small but supremely skilled fighters demonstrated levels of technique that many of the larger candidates couldn't match. The end came suddenly. Vasquez attempted a complex foot sweep that would have been spectacular if it had worked. But Sarah read the technique just soon enough to counter, turning what would have been her downfall into a throwing technique that sent Vasquez flying across the arena. The pilot landed hard and couldn't beat the count. "Outstanding," Vasquez said as Sarah helped her to her feet. "That counter was beautiful. Go show them what we can really do." Which brought Sarah to where she now stood, facing Torres across 20 meters of arena floor, while 200 candidates and a dozen instructors watched from the gallery. The big Marine had cruised through his bracket, overwhelming opponents with combinations of strength, speed, and surprising technical skill. His semifinal victory had been particularly brutal, a devastating series of strikes that left his opponent needing medical attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," the arena announcer's voice echoed through the facility, "for the hand-to-hand combat championship, we have candidate Chen versus Gunnery Sergeant Torres. This match will determine not only individual rankings, but bragging rights for the next month of training." Torres approached the center of the arena with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight that mattered. At 6'6" and nearly 300 pounds, he looked like he could bench press a shuttlecraft. His reach advantage alone was intimidating, and Sarah knew that one solid hit from those massive hands could end the match instantly. "Surprised you made it this far," Torres said quietly as they touched gloves. "But this is where reality sets in. Size matters, and you're about to learn why." "We'll see," Sarah replied, her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The match began with Torres doing exactly what Sarah had expected, pressing forward immediately, trying to use his reach and power to overwhelm her before she could establish any kind of tactical advantage. His first combination was a thing of beauty, perfectly executed strikes that would have devastated most opponents. But Sarah wasn't there to receive them. She moved like water, flowing around his attacks while staying just inside his effective range. Torres was good, better than she had expected, but he was fighting the same fight as all her previous opponents. He wanted to impose his will through superior physicality, to prove that training and technique couldn't overcome raw genetic advantages. For the first minute, Sarah did nothing but survive, learning his patterns and timing while avoiding his most dangerous attacks. The crowd grew restless, expecting to see the kind of quick, decisive finish that had characterized her earlier matches. Instead, they saw something much more interesting. 30 seconds into the second minute, Sarah shifted tactics. Instead of purely defensive movement, she began to mix in quick, precise strikes. Not the kind of power shots that would knock Torres down, but pinpoint attacks designed to disrupt his timing and create small openings. A sharp jab to his lead shoulder that made him drop his guard for just an instant. A foot stomp that caused him to shift his weight awkwardly. A quick elbow to his ribs that made him favor one side slightly. None of the strikes were individually devastating, but together they began to add up. Torres grew increasingly frustrated as his attacks found nothing but air. He was stronger and more powerful, but Sarah was making him fight her fight, a battle of precision and timing where his advantages counted for less. "Stand still and fight!" Torres snarled as another of his combinations missed completely. Sarah didn't reply, but she smiled. The smile seemed to enrage Torres even more. He abandoned his careful technique and lunged forward with a wild haymaker that would have taken Sarah's head off if it had connected. Instead, it left him completely off balance and exposed. Sarah's counter was a work of art. She slipped inside his extended arm, drove her shoulder into his midsection to further upset his balance, and then executed a perfect hip toss that used his own momentum against him. All 300 pounds of Marine went flying through the air before crashing to the arena floor. The impact would have stunned most people, but Torres was tougher than most people. He rolled with the throw and came back to his feet immediately, now clearly taking Sarah seriously for the first time in the match. "Okay," he said, wiping blood from a split lip. "Let's really dance." What followed was 2 minutes of the most intense hand-to-hand combat anyone in the facility had ever witnessed. Torres abandoned his earlier strategy of overwhelming force and switched to a more technical approach, using his training and experience to try to outfight Sarah on skill alone. But skill was exactly where Sarah excelled. She began to dismantle him systematically, the way a master chess player might defeat an enthusiastic amateur. Every technique Torres tried, she had a counter for. Every strategy he employed, she had already anticipated. Her years of study weren't just academic exercise. They were practical preparation for exactly this kind of fight. When Torres attempted a powerful takedown, Sarah sprawled and countered with a knee strike that made him grunt in pain. When he tried to corner her against the arena boundary, she used the wall as a springboard to launch herself over his head in a move that left him swinging at empty air. When he finally managed to grab hold of her, she turned his grip into a joint lock that nearly broke his wrist. The crowd was on its feet now, watching something unprecedented. The biggest, strongest candidate in the program was being methodically picked apart by someone half his size, and there was nothing he could do about it. With 30 seconds left in the match, Torres was breathing heavily, favoring his left side and showing the accumulated damage of dozens of precise strikes. Sarah, by contrast, looked like she could fight for another hour. "Impossible," Torres muttered, as another of his attacks missed by inches. "Inevitable," Sarah replied, and struck. The combination was perfect, a faint high that made Torres raise his guard, followed by a low kick that buckled his knee, finished with an uppercut that caught him perfectly as he fell forward. Torres crashed to the ground and didn't get up. The arena was silent for a heartbeat. Then the place erupted. Candidates cheered, instructors nodded approvingly, and even some of Torres's Marine friends applauded. But Sarah barely heard any of it. She was focused on Torres, who was slowly getting to his feet with obvious effort. "Hell of a fight," he said finally, extending his hand. "I underestimated you." "Yes, you did," Sarah replied, shaking his hand firmly. "But you won't make that mistake again." As they walked off the arena floor together, Sarah felt a change in the atmosphere around her. The whispers were different now, respectful instead of dismissive, curious instead of skeptical. For the first time since arriving at Kepler Station, she felt like she belonged. But the real test was still coming. The next morning brought news that would change everything. Commander Webb assembled all the candidates in the main briefing room. his expression grim as he activated the holographic display. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation," he began. "6 hours ago, we lost contact with the research station on Kepler 442b. Initial reconnaissance suggests hostile alien forces have taken control of the facility and captured the research team." The hologram showed a detailed layout of the research station, a sprawling complex built into the side of a mountain, designed to study the unique atmospheric conditions of the gas giant. It was heavily defended and strategically important, the kind of target that would require the best of the best to retake. "This is no longer a training exercise," Webb continued. "Command has decided to accelerate the program. The top 50 candidates will be deployed immediately for a live combat mission. The rest will return to regular military service." A murmur ran through the assembled candidates. This was unprecedented. Using trainees for actual combat operations was almost unheard of. "Sir," Torres raised his hand, "what kind of alien forces are we talking about?" Webb's expression darkened. "Hegemony raiders. Advanced weaponry, superior numbers, and they've had 6 hours to fortify their position. This won't be a simulation where you respawn if you make a mistake. This is the real thing, and people are going to die." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The hegemony was humanity's most dangerous enemy, a coalition of alien species that viewed humans as inferior pests to be exterminated. Their technology was more advanced, their tactics were ruthless, and they took no prisoners. "The good news," Webb continued, "is that this gives you a chance to prove yourselves under real conditions. The mission will test everything you've learned here: tactical thinking, combat skills, teamwork, and courage under fire. Succeed, and you'll have earned your place among humanity's elite. Fail." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "Team assignments will be posted within the hour. Mission briefing begins at 1400 hours. Dismissed." As the candidates filed out of the briefing room, Sarah noticed that the dynamics had shifted again. The success of yesterday's combat tournament had earned her respect, but respect was a fragile thing when faced with the reality of actual alien combat. She could see doubt creeping back into people's expressions, hear whispers about whether someone her size could handle a real firefight. The team assignments, when they came, were both encouraging and ominous. Sarah found herself assigned to Alpha Team, the primary assault unit tasked with retaking the main research facility. It was an honor, recognition that she was considered among the top candidates. But it was also the most dangerous assignment, the team most likely to face heavy combat. Torres was also assigned to Alpha Team, along with Vasquez, Hassan, and 6 other top candidates. As they gathered for their pre-mission briefing, Sarah could feel the tension crackling between them. Yesterday's combat tournament had settled some questions, but it had raised others. In a simulation, Sarah's tactical brilliance and technical skills had made her untouchable. But how would those same skills translate to real combat against alien enemies who wouldn't follow human patterns or respect human limitations? "Okay, people," Captain Park began as she activated the tactical display. "Here's what we know about the target. The research station has 3 main sections connected by armored corridors. Intelligence suggests the aliens are using the Central Command Center as their primary stronghold, with observation posts in the outer sections." The holographic layout showed a complex 3-dimensional structure that had been carved directly into the mountain. Multiple levels, numerous choke points, and dozens of rooms where enemies could be hiding. It was a tactician's nightmare and a soldier's worst fear. "Our mission is to neutralize all hostile forces and rescue any surviving research personnel," Park continued. "We'll be inserted via stealth dropships at 3 different landing zones, converging on the facility from multiple angles. Alpha Team gets the command center, the hardest target, but also the most important." Sarah studied the tactical display with growing concern. The aliens had chosen their position well. The command center was at the heart of the complex, protected by multiple defensive layers and accessible only through narrow corridors that would channel any assault into predicted kill zones. "Questions?" Park asked. Torres raised his hand. "What kind of resistance are we expecting?" "Unknown," Park replied honestly. Hegemony raiders typically operate in squad-sized units of 8 to 12 individuals. Their equipment includes energy weapons, personal shields, and tactical AI support. They're disciplined, well-trained, and they don't make mistakes. Sarah felt her stomach clench. Everything about this mission screamed ambush. The aliens had had hours to prepare their defenses, study the facility layout, and position themselves for maximum effectiveness. A direct assault would be suicide. But as she looked around the room at her teammates, she realized that a direct assault was exactly what they were planning. "Sir," she said, raising her hand, "has anyone considered an indirect approach?" Captain Park frowned. "Explain." Sarah stood up and approached the holographic display, her mind already working through possibilities. The facility was designed for atmospheric research, which means it needs direct access to the outside environment. There should be atmospheric monitoring stations, weather sensors, and emergency ventilation systems throughout the complex. She traced her finger along the display, highlighting maintenance access points and utility corridors that weren't part of the main facility structure. If we can access the facility through these secondary systems, we could bypass their primary defenses entirely. Torres shook his head. Those passages would be too small for a full assault team, and we don't know if they're even accessible from the outside. Some of them would be too small, Sarah agreed. But not all. And we don't need to get the entire team through. A small infiltration unit could access the facility's internal systems, disable their defenses, and create openings for the main assault force. Captain Park studied the display thoughtfully. It's risky. If the infiltration team gets trapped inside those passages, they'd be completely cut off from support. "Everything about this mission is risky," Sarah replied. "But this gives us a chance to turn the aliens' preparation against them. They're expecting us to come through the main entrances because that's how human military doctrine would approach the problem. They might not have considered that we'd be willing to crawl through maintenance tunnels." The room fell silent as everyone considered the implications. It was a typically Sarah solution. Clever, unconventional, and dependent on precise execution rather than overwhelming force. "I like it," Vasquez said finally. "The technical requirements would be challenging, but it's definitely possible." Hassan nodded agreement. Their tactical AI would be programmed to defend against conventional assault patterns. An infiltration approach might catch them completely off guard. Torres looked skeptical, but he didn't voice any objections. After yesterday's arena match, he seemed less willing to dismiss Sarah's ideas out of hand. Captain Park made the decision. "We'll plan for both contingencies. Standard assault through the main entrances with a parallel infiltration operation through the utility systems. Candidate Chen, you'll lead the infiltration team. Sergeant Torres, you'll command the main assault force." As the briefing continued with detailed planning and equipment assignments, Sarah felt the familiar mixture of excitement and terror that came with being given enormous responsibility. In a few hours, she would be leading a team into actual combat against alien enemies. Everything she had learned, everything she had trained for, would be put to the ultimate test. But for the first time since arriving at Kepler Station, she felt truly ready for what was coming. The mission preparation took 4 hours. Sarah's infiltration team was stripped down to essential equipment, light weapons, minimal armor, and specialized tools for accessing the facility's utility systems. They would be faster and more maneuverable than the main assault force, but also more vulnerable if things went wrong. Her team consisted of herself, Tanaka for her technical expertise, O'Brien for his investigative skills, and Hassan for communication support. 4 people against unknown numbers of technologically superior aliens, tasked with infiltrating a fortified position and disabling defenses from the inside. Nervous? O'Brien asked as they conducted final equipment checks. Terrified, Sarah replied honestly, but also excited. This is what we trained for. Think it'll work? Tanaka inquired, testing her electronic warfare gear. Sarah looked out through the observation deck at the swirling storms of Kepler 442b, where somewhere in those clouds, a research station full of hostages waited for rescue. It has to work, she said quietly, because if it doesn't, a lot of good people are going to die. As the assault teams prepared to board their dropships, Sarah found herself face to face with Torres one more time. The big Marine looked different now, more serious, more focused. The hostility was gone, replaced by professional respect. "Bring them home," he said simply. "You too," Sarah replied. Then it was time to go to war. The dropship cut through the swirling atmosphere of Kepler 442b like a blade through silk, its stealth systems rendering it nearly invisible to enemy sensors. Through the small porthole, Sarah watched the research station grow larger as they approached their insertion point. The facility clung to the mountainside like a metallic parasite, its lights dim and ominous against the red rock face. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot's voice crackled through the comm system. "Weather's getting rough down there. Hope you brought your grip shoes." Sarah checked her equipment one final time. Lightweight assault rifle, minimal ammunition, climbing gear, and Tanaka's specially modified electronics package that would hopefully give them access to the facility's internal systems. Everything they needed to succeed, and nothing they could afford to lose. "Remember the plan?" she said quietly to her team. "We go in quiet, disable their defenses, and create an opening for the main assault. If something goes wrong, we adapt and overcome. Questions?" Hassan shook his head, his fingers nervously checking his communication gear. O'Brien cracked his knuckles, the ex-detective's face set in grim determination. Tanaka looked pale but focused, her engineer's mind already working through the technical challenges they would face. "What about the aliens?" Tanaka asked. "Intelligence was pretty vague about their capabilities." "That's because intelligence doesn't know," Sarah replied honestly. "Hegemony raiders are adaptable. They study human tactics and modify their own accordingly. We can't count on them fighting the way we expect." The dropship shuddered as it hit a pocket of turbulence, the pilot fighting to maintain course through the increasingly violent atmosphere. Through the comm system, they could hear the chatter from the other assault teams as they approached their own insertion points. "Alpha Main to all teams," Torres's voice came through clearly. "Weather's affecting our approach. We're going to be 15 minutes behind schedule." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold mountain air. If the main assault was delayed, her infiltration team would be on their own inside the facility for longer than planned. More time for things to go wrong, more opportunities for the aliens to detect and eliminate them. "Alpha infiltration to Alpha Main," she responded. "Copy the delay. We'll proceed as planned and establish overwatch until you're in position." "Negative," Torres replied immediately. "Hold at the insertion point until we're ready to coordinate the assault." Sarah frowned. Holding at the insertion point would mean sitting exposed on the mountainside for 15 minutes while alien sensors swept the area. It would also mean losing the element of surprise that was crucial to their mission. "Alpha Main, recommend we proceed with infiltration as planned," she said carefully. "Delay increases risk of detection." There was a pause, and Sarah could imagine Torres weighing tactical considerations against his obvious desire to maintain control of the mission. Finally, his voice came back, tight with reluctance. "Your call, Alpha Infiltration, but maintain radio silence until the main assault begins. We don't want to compromise your position." "Copy that. Alpha Infiltration out." The dropship touched down with barely a whisper on a narrow ledge 2 kilometers from the research station. Sarah's team slipped out into the howling wind and driving rain, their environmental suits protecting them from the harsh conditions but doing nothing for visibility. "Stay close," Sarah called over the noise of the storm. "Follow my lead and watch for loose rock." The approach to the facility took 45 minutes of treacherous climbing across rain-slicked stone and through narrow ravines that threatened to send them tumbling into the abyss below. But Sarah had chosen their route carefully, following natural features that would mask their thermal signatures and keep them below the horizon line of the facility's sensor arrays. When they finally reached the facility's outer perimeter, Sarah called for a halt. Through her binoculars, she could see the research station's main entrance, a heavily armored airlock set into the mountainside like a bank vault door. Red lights pulsed along the entrance tunnel, indicating alien occupation. "There," Tanaka whispered, pointing to a barely visible grate about 50 meters to their right. "Atmospheric monitoring station. Should connect directly to the main environmental system." Sarah studied the approach. The grate was positioned on a narrow ledge about 20 meters above their current position, accessible only by an exposed climb across the rock face. Once they were there, they would be completely vulnerable to observation from the facility. But it was their best option. "O'Brien, you're our lookout," she decided. "Hassan, maintain comm watch. Tanaka, you're with me. We go up fast and quiet." The climb was nerve-wracking but manageable. Sarah's rock climbing experience served her well as she found handholds in the wet stone, pulling herself steadily upward while Tanaka followed close behind. Within 10 minutes, they had reached the atmospheric monitoring station. The grate was exactly what Tanaka had predicted, a standard environmental access point designed for maintenance personnel. But it was also alarmed, with sensor wires that would trigger security alerts if disturbed. "Give me 2 minutes," Tanaka whispered, producing a kit of electronic tools. "I need to bypass the alarm system." Sarah kept watch while the engineer worked, scanning the facility's exterior for signs of alien activity. The main entrance remained sealed, but she could see movement through some of the facility's windows, shadowy figures that moved with the fluid grace of non-human entities. "Done," Tanaka announced quietly. "But once we open this, we're committed. No turning back." Sarah nodded and keyed her radio. "Alpha infiltration to Overwatch. We're going in." O'Brien's voice crackled back. "Copy. All clear from here. Good hunting." The atmospheric monitoring tunnel was exactly as cramped and uncomfortable as Sarah had expected. Barely wide enough for one person, it wound through the facility's interior like a metallic intestine, branching off to various environmental sensors and air circulation nodes. The walls were slick with condensation, and the air tasted of metal and electricity. Facility schematic shows the main environmental control room about 200 meters ahead, Tanaka whispered as they crawled through the darkness. "That should give us access to security systems, power distribution, and communication networks." They had covered about half the distance when Hassan's voice came through their earpieces, tight with urgency. "Alpha infiltration. You've got movement in the main corridor. Multiple contacts heading toward your sector." Sarah froze, listening intently. Through the metal walls of the tunnel, she could hear something. Rhythmic footsteps that didn't quite match human cadence, and a low, harmonic humming that raised the hair on the back of her neck. "Patrol," she breathed. "They're doing security sweeps." The footsteps passed directly overhead, so close that Sarah could feel vibrations through the tunnel walls. For a terrifying moment, she was certain that the aliens would detect them, that their infiltration would end before it had truly begun. But the footsteps continued past, fading into the distance. "Clear," Hassan reported. "Patrol is moving toward the outer perimeter." Sarah and Tanaka resumed their crawling, moving as quickly as they dared through the narrow space. The environmental control room was exactly where the facility schematic had indicated. a spacious chamber filled with atmospheric processors, water recycling units, and most importantly, the central computer terminal that controlled the facility's systems. "Bingo!" Tanaka whispered as she connected her portable computer to the control terminal. "I'm in." Sarah positioned herself at the room's entrance, watching the corridor beyond while Tanaka worked her electronic magic. The facility was eerily quiet, with only the hum of machinery and the distant sound of alien voices speaking in languages that human ears weren't designed to process. "Got the security grid," Tanaka announced, "uploading facility layout with all sensor positions. And there we go. I can see exactly where everyone is." She transferred the data to Sarah's tactical display, revealing a three-dimensional map of the facility with red dots marking alien positions. There were 12 contacts total, exactly what intelligence had predicted for a hegemony raiding unit. "They're concentrated in the main command center," Sarah observed, studying the tactical display. 3 guards at the entrance, 2 in the control room, and the rest positioned to cover the main approach corridors. "Standard defensive deployment," Tanaka agreed. "They're expecting a frontal assault through the main entrances." Sarah keyed her radio. "Alpha infiltration to Alpha Main. We're in position. Sending tactical data now." Torres's voice came back immediately. "Copy. Alpha infiltration. Beginning main assault in 5 minutes. Can you disable their defensive systems?" "Working on it," Tanaka replied, her fingers flying over the computer interface. "Security grid is down. Internal sensors are offline. There. They're officially blind inside their own facility." But as Tanaka worked, Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The tactical display showed the aliens repositioning, moving away from their defensive positions and toward the environmental control room. "Tanaka," she said urgently, "we need to move, now." "Almost finished," the engineer replied, not looking up from her work. "Just need to unlock the blast doors for the main assault team." The sound of approaching footsteps cut through the facility's ambient noise like a knife. Not the rhythmic patrol patterns they had observed before, but the purposeful movement of a coordinated search team. "They know we're here," Sarah realized with growing horror. "The alarm bypass. They detected it somehow." Tanaka's face went white as the implications sank in. "The main assault team is still 3 minutes out," she whispered. "If the aliens reset the security grid before then?" Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. 3 minutes was an eternity in combat time. The aliens would reach their position in less than 1 minute, and once they did, not only would Sarah's team be eliminated, but the main assault would face fully prepared defenses, and the tactical advantage would be lost completely. Unless... "New plan," she said quietly. "Finish the upload and then shut down all power to this section of the facility. Make it look like a system failure." "That'll cut our escape route," Tanaka protested. "We'll be trapped in here." "No, we won't," Sarah replied, checking her weapon and moving toward the corridor. "Because we're not staying here." She keyed her radio one final time. "Alpha infiltration to Alpha Main. Change of plans. Beginning immediate assault on alien positions. Recommend you accelerate your timeline." Torres's voice crackled with alarm. "Negative Alpha infiltration. Hold your position until main assault is in place." But Sarah was already moving. The corridor beyond the environmental control room was dimly lit and filled with the kind of tactical shadows that made every doorway a potential death trap. Sarah moved with practiced stealth, her weapon ready, but her mind focused on the tactical display that showed alien positions throughout the facility. Behind her, she could hear Tanaka completing the power shutdown and the facility's lights dimming to emergency levels. The environmental systems wound down with gradually fading hums, creating an eerie silence that was broken only by the distant sound of alien voices. Sarah reached the first junction and peered around the corner. 2 aliens were positioned at the far end of the corridor, their backs to her as they communicated in their incomprehensible language. They were tall and lean, with elongated limbs and skin that seemed to shift color in the dim light. Their weapons were elegant curves of metal and energy that looked like works of art. Sarah had never killed a sentient being before. All her training had been simulations, exercises, theoretical preparation for a moment that had always seemed distant and abstract. Now, faced with the reality of actual alien enemies, she felt a moment of hesitation. Then she thought about the captured research team, the hostages depending on her success, and the main assault team that would walk into a slaughter if she failed. The hesitation vanished. Sarah's first shot took the left alien in the center of mass. The high-velocity round penetrating its energy shield and dropping it instantly. The second alien spun toward her, bringing its weapon to bear, but Sarah was already moving. Her second shot caught it in the head, ending the threat before it could return fire. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility as the remaining aliens realized they were under attack from an unexpected direction. Sarah could hear boots pounding on metal decking as enemy forces repositioned to deal with the new threat. "Alpha infiltration to all teams," she called into her radio. "Alien positions are compromised. Beginning systematic elimination of hostile forces." Torres's voice came back strained and urgent. "Alpha infiltration, what's your status? We're 2 minutes out." "Buying you time," Sarah replied, moving deeper into the facility. "Maintain current approach and be ready to exploit openings." The next 5 minutes were a blur of movement, gunfire, and tactical decision-making that would have seemed impossible to the small woman who had first arrived at Kepler Station. Sarah moved through the facility like a ghost, using her knowledge of the layout and the aliens' disrupted defensive positions to strike where they were weakest. She eliminated 2 more aliens who were repositioning to reinforce the main entrance, using their own tactical doctrine against them by attacking from directions they hadn't prepared to defend. When 3 aliens attempted to flank her through the facility's secondary corridors, she used improvised explosive devices from Tanaka's engineering kit to collapse the passages and trap them. But the most significant engagement came when she reached the command center itself. 5 aliens had barricaded themselves in the main control room, along with 6 human hostages who were bound and under guard. It was the kind of tactical nightmare that would have stumped conventional assault teams. Hostages in the line of fire, superior enemy numbers, and defensive positions that channeled any attack into predetermined kill zones. Sarah studied the situation for 30 seconds, then smiled. The ventilation system she had used to infiltrate the facility didn't just provide access to environmental controls, it also connected every major room in the complex, including the command center. And while the main vents were too small for human passage, the emergency air exchange ports were just large enough for a determined person with the right equipment. Sarah's approach was so unconventional that the aliens never saw it coming. While they watched the doorways and corridors for conventional assault, she dropped through the ceiling directly into their midst, her weapon firing before she hit the ground. The first alien went down before it knew she was there. The second managed to turn toward her, but caught a burst of automatic fire that sent it crashing into the control console. The third and fourth tried to use the hostages as shields, but Sarah's precision shooting eliminated them without endangering the captured researchers. The fifth alien, the unit leader based on its more elaborate equipment, attempted to activate what looked like a self-destruct device. Sarah's final shot took off 3 of its manipulator appendages and sent the device skittering across the floor, where it powered down harmlessly. "Hostages secure," she reported into her radio as she began cutting the researchers' bonds. "Command center neutralized. All alien contacts eliminated." The facility fell silent except for the groans and tears of the rescued hostages. 6 researchers who had thought they would die on an alien world, saved by a small woman who had been underestimated by everyone who met her. "Alpha infiltration," Torres's voice came through the radio, tight with amazement. "Confirm your status. Are you saying you've cleared the entire facility?" "Affirmative, Alpha Main," Sarah replied calmly. "Facility is secure. All hostile forces eliminated. Hostages are safe and ready for extraction." There was a long pause before Torres responded. When he did, his voice carried a note of respect that hadn't been there before. "Outstanding work. Alpha infiltration. Main assault teams are standing down. We're coming in for extraction and cleanup." 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in the facility's main corridor as the other assault teams flooded through the entrances she had unlocked for them. They moved with weapons ready and tactical formations prepared for fierce resistance, only to find empty corridors and the bodies of alien raiders who had been systematically eliminated by a 4-person infiltration team. Torres approached her as she supervised the hostage evacuation, his expression a mixture of amazement and grudging admiration. 12 aliens, he said quietly. "You took down 12 aliens." "My team took down 12 aliens," Sarah corrected. "Tanaka disabled their systems, Hassan provided overwatch, and O'Brien coordinated our tactical intelligence. It was a team effort." Torres shook his head. "My Marines were ready to assault this place with overwhelming force and superior numbers. We had contingency plans for heavy casualties and extended firefights, and you just walked in and eliminated the entire enemy force like it was a training exercise." Sarah looked around the facility, taking in the tactical positions the aliens had prepared, the sophisticated defenses that had been bypassed, the hostages who were now safe because someone had been willing to think differently about an impossible problem. "It wasn't impossible," she said finally. "It just required a different approach." "You made it look easy," Torres continued. "My entire team, 5 Marines with decades of combined experience, and we were planning for a battle. You turned it into a mop-up operation." Sarah smiled, thinking back to all the whispers and doubts, all the assumptions about what someone her size could or couldn't accomplish. Sometimes the smallest key opens the biggest doors. The return journey to Kepler Station was triumphant, but subdued. Sarah found herself surrounded by candidates and instructors who wanted to hear every detail of the infiltration mission, but she deflected most of the attention to her teammates. Tanaka's technical skills had made the mission possible, Hassan's communication support had been crucial, and O'Brien's tactical analysis had kept them alive. But privately, Sarah knew that something fundamental had changed during those 5 minutes in the alien facility. She had faced the ultimate test, real combat against technologically superior enemies with lives hanging in the balance. And not only had she succeeded, she had dominated. Commander Webb found her in the observation lounge that evening, staring out at the swirling storms of Kepler 442b, where the research station was once again operating under human control. "Remarkable performance today, Candidate Chen," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "The kind of tactical brilliance that legends are made of." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied. But it wasn't about brilliance. It was about preparation meeting opportunity. Webb nodded thoughtfully. "The other candidates are calling it the infiltration. Word is already spreading through the fleet about the small woman who single-handedly eliminated an entire hegemony raiding unit." Sarah winced. "That's not entirely accurate, sir. I had excellent team support and you led from the front, made split-second decisions under fire, and accomplished the impossible," Webb interrupted. "Don't diminish what you did today. The galaxy needs more officers who can think beyond conventional parameters." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the storms rage across the gas giant's surface. Finally, Webb spoke again. "Your graduation ceremony is tomorrow. Top of the class, naturally. Any thoughts on your first assignment?" Sarah turned to look at him, surprised. "I thought that would be determined by command requirements." Webb smiled. "Usually, yes, but exceptional officers sometimes get exceptional opportunities. There's a new unit being formed, deep reconnaissance specialists who operate independently behind enemy lines. They need someone who can think creatively and adapt to impossible situations. Sarah felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. That sounds challenging. It would be the most dangerous assignment in the fleet, Webb warned. No backup, no reinforcements, no safety net. Just you and a small team against whatever the galaxy throws at you. Sarah thought about the whispers that had followed her since arriving at Kepler Station, the assumptions about her limitations, the certainty that someone her size couldn't measure up to the physical demands of elite military service. Then she thought about 12 alien raiders who had learned too late that size wasn't everything. "When do I start?" she asked. Commander Webb's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that." The graduation ceremony the next morning was a celebration of everything the Titan program represented. 50 candidates who had started as strangers had been forged into humanity's newest special forces operators, ready to face whatever threats emerged from the dark spaces between the stars. Sarah stood at attention as her name was called, accepting her commission and the insignia that marked her as one of humanity's elite warriors. But what she remembered most wasn't the ceremony or the applause or even Commander Webb's speech about exceptional performance under fire. What she remembered was Torres approaching her afterward, his massive hand extended in genuine respect. "Hell of a thing you did out there," he said simply. "Made all of us look like amateurs." "You're not amateurs," Sarah replied, shaking his hand firmly. "You're just used to fighting a different kind of war." Torres grinned. "Maybe it's time we all learn to fight your kind of war. Something tells me the galaxy's going to need it." As Sarah walked away from the ceremony, her new assignment orders in her pocket and the infinite possibilities of space spreading out before her, she thought about the long journey that had brought her to this moment. From the academy on Mars to the training grounds of Kepler Station to the alien-infested corridors of a research facility on a distant moon, each step had prepared her for what was coming next. She had been mocked, underestimated, and dismissed by people who confused physical size with actual capability. But she had proven that the most powerful weapon in any arsenal wasn't size or strength or even superior firepower. It was the willingness to think differently when everyone else was thinking the same. Sarah Chen had started her military career as a small woman in a big galaxy, surrounded by people who doubted her potential. She was graduating as one of humanity's most promising special forces operators, with a reputation that would precede her to every assignment and every battlefield. And somewhere in the dark spaces between the stars, humanity's enemies were about to learn what the hegemony raiders had discovered too late, that sometimes the most dangerous opponent was the one you didn't see coming. The whispers would follow Sarah Chen for the rest of her career. But now they would be whispers of respect, admiration, and sometimes fear from those who knew what she was capable of when underestimated. And she wouldn't have it any other way.